Chosen one, pause for a moment and breathe. This is not random. This is not just another video. I carry an urgent message today, and I must be clear from the beginning. This is not for everyone who stumbles across it. If you are not serious about God, if you are still playing with faith, scrolling without conviction, this is your sign to leave. But if you walk with God in private, if you endure silently, if your spirit has been carrying more than your mouth has spoken, then stay right here. This message belongs to you. God has been watching you closely. God has been watching you closely. Not your perfection, not your mistakes, but your attitude in moments where most people would have broken, reacted, or walked away. The way you handled what hurt you left heaven quiet. Your response shocked the spiritual realm. Even Michael took notice of how you stood firm without making noise. And here is why you need to stay until the end. What you thought was God being distant was actually God being deeply attentive. By the time this message finishes, you will understand why everything unfolded the way it did, and your heart will finally feel lighter. Before we go deeper, chosen ones like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, tap the bell icon, share this message with other chosen ones, and comment 777 in the comments to declare that you are aligned with God's divine purpose. The attitude that heaven noticed. Chosen one, let me speak plainly to you now. Heaven was not watching your noise. Heaven was watching your posture. Not how loudly you prayed, not how often you spoke about faith, but how you carried yourself when no one was clapping, no one was explaining, and no one was rescuing you. Your attitude in those unseen moments is what caught God's attention. Many people think attitude is about mood. It is not. Attitude is how you respond when life does not respond back. It is what rises out of you when answers delay, doors remain closed, and people misunderstand your intentions. And this is where you surprised heaven. You did not collapse the way others expected. You did not become bitter the way the situation invited you to. You did not turn cold, angry, or reckless. Something in you stayed anchored. Let me tell you something important. God studies reactions. Heaven observes patterns. The spiritual realm listens closely to how a soul responds under pressure. And when the pressure increased around you, something unusual happened. You chose restraint when retaliation would have felt good. You chose silence when defending yourself would have been easier. You chose patience when frustration was justified. That decision alone separated you from many. You see, chosen ones are not measured by how loudly they claim faith, but by how quietly they carry it. Anyone can praise God when life is smooth. Anyone can testify when blessings are visible. But only the chosen maintain composure when they feel overlooked, delayed, or misunderstood. And that composure is not weakness. It is discipline. It is spiritual maturity forming in real time. God noticed that you stopped explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. That was not arrogance. That was wisdom. God noticed that you didn't chase validation from those who could not see your heart. God noticed that you kept your integrity intact, even when no reward was guaranteed. This is rare, and rarity always attracts divine attention. There were moments when you could have complained and no one would have blamed you. Moments when bitterness would have made sense. Moments when walking away from faith would have felt justified. But instead of reacting emotionally, you responded thoughtfully. Instead of allowing pain to harden you, you allowed it to deepen you. That choice spoke louder in the spiritual realm than any prayer you whispered. Let me slow this down so your mind can rest for a moment. You were not ignored. You were observed. You were not forgotten. You were evaluated. God was watching how you handled disappointment without becoming disrespectful, how you handled silence without becoming insecure, how you handled delay without becoming desperate. These moments were not small. They were defining. Your attitude showed God that you are teachable, that you are steady, that you can be trusted with more. Many people ask God for elevation, but few have the emotional control to sustain it. Elevation without maturity destroys people. God will never rush you into a position your character cannot survive. So before promotion, there is observation. And you pass that stage without even knowing it. You didn't curse your season. You didn't envy others loudly. You didn't rush God with ultimatums. You learned how to breathe through uncertainty. You learned how to sit with unanswered questions. You learned how to trust without constant reassurance. That is not normal behavior. That is trained behavior. And training always precedes assignment. I want you to understand something deeply. Heaven is not impressed by emotional reactions. Heaven is impressed by emotional regulation. When you chose calm over chaos, peace over panic, stillness over stress, something shifted. God saw that you were no longer being controlled by circumstances. You were becoming grounded in truth, and grounded people cannot be easily shaken. This is why your attitude mattered so much. It showed growth, it showed healing, It showed that past wounds no longer controlled your present responses. It showed that you are not led by impulse, but by discernment. And discernment is one of the strongest signs of spiritual maturity. Some people around you reacted loudly. It became proof that God's work in you is real, deep, and lasting. You didn't just survive the moment, you handled it with dignity. And dignity is a language heaven understands very well. Let me speak to your heart now. If you ever wondered whether staying calm was worth it, it was. If you ever questioned whether holding your tongue mattered, it did. If you ever felt foolish for choosing peace over proving a point, hear me clearly. God saw it. God honored it. God recorded it. This is why you felt stretched, but not destroyed. Pressured, but not crushed. Confused, but not lost. You were being shaped quietly. Heaven was watching closely, and your attitude spoke volumes when your mouth said very little. Take a deep breath right now. Let your shoulders relax. You did not handle things wrong. You handled them wisely, and wisdom always invites divine favor, even when it feels lonely in the moment. What heaven noticed was not perfection. It was progression. And that progression is about to matter more than you realize. There were people watching you who expected you to break. They expected a reaction. They expected anger, bitterness, or withdrawal. When you didn't give them that, confusion entered the atmosphere. But peace entered you. And peace is always a sign that God is near. God was speechless because you didn't make the situation about yourself. You didn't say, "Why me?" You didn't turn inward in self-pity. You allowed the process to shape you instead of resenting it. That humility is not taught easily. It is earned through experience and surrender. Let me calm your heart right now. If you ever wondered whether your quiet endurance mattered, it did. If you ever questioned whether staying faithful in silence was noticed, it was. God saw your restraint as strength. He saw your patience as power. He saw your stillness as trust. This is why heaven responded the way it did. Your response disrupted expectations. It revealed readiness. It revealed stability. It revealed a soul that can be trusted with more responsibility, more influence, and more impact. God was not silent because he was unsure. He was silent because he was acknowledging something rare. A chosen one who has learned how to rest in faith instead of reacting in fear. And that chosen one is why this season is not ending in loss. It is ending in recognition. And let me tell you something else that many people overlook. God was speechless not because he lacked words, but because your response removed the need for correction. There was nothing to rebuke, nothing to restrain, nothing to realign. You were already positioned correctly in your spirit. That kind of alignment is rare, especially after disappointment. Most people need to be redirected when things don't go their way. They drift into resentment, they drift into comparison, they drift into self-blame or pride. But you didn't drift, you stayed centered, you stayed anchored. Even when your emotions were heavy, you didn't let them drive the direction of your faith. That alone speaks of inner authority. You didn't ask God to prove himself. You didn't test him with ultimatums. You didn't say, "If you don't move now, I'm done." Instead, you adjusted your expectations without abandoning your belief. That flexibility is a sign of wisdom. Rigid faith breaks under pressure. Mature faith bends without snapping. There were moments when you felt disappointed, yes, but you did not let disappointment turn into distrust. You felt the weight, but you didn't let it crush your hope. You acknowledged your emotions without letting them dominate your decisions. That balance is not common, and heaven recognizes balance. God saw that you learned how to sit with discomfort without rushing to escape it. You didn't numb yourself spiritually. You didn't distract yourself with noise. You didn't abandon your values just to feel better temporarily. You stayed present. You stayed honest. You stayed faithful, even when faith felt quiet. This is why I keep saying your response was rare. You didn't need God to constantly reassure you. You trusted his character more than your circumstances. And when someone trusts God's character, they stop demanding constant explanations. They understand that silence does not mean absence. It often means preparation. Let this settle into your spirit gently. You were not being tested to fail. You were being observed to be trusted. God was not measuring your endurance to exhaust you. He was measuring your stability to elevate you. And now you can rest in this truth. What you handled quietly has already spoken loudly in the spiritual realm. There were people watching you who expected you to break. They expected a reaction. They expected anger, bitterness, or withdrawal. When you didn't give them that, confusion entered the atmosphere. But peace entered you. And peace is always a sign that God is near. God was speechless because you didn't make the situation about yourself. You didn't say, "Why me?" You didn't turn inward in self-pity. You allowed the process to shape you instead of resenting it. That humility is not taught easily. It is earned through experience and surrender. Let me calm your heart right now. If you ever wondered whether your quiet endurance mattered, It did. If you ever question whether staying faithful in silence was noticed, it was. God saw your restraint as strength. He saw your patience as power. He saw your stillness as trust. This is why heaven responded the way it did. Your response disrupted expectations. It revealed readiness. It revealed stability. It revealed a soul that can be trusted with more responsibility, more influence, and more impact. God was not silent because he was unsure. He was silent because he was acknowledging something rare. A chosen one who has learned how to rest in faith instead of reacting in fear. And that chosen one is why this season is not ending in loss. It is ending in recognition. And let me tell you something else that many people overlook. God was speechless not because he lacked words, but because your response removed the need for correction. There was nothing to rebuke, nothing to restrain, nothing to realign. You were already positioned correctly in your spirit. That kind of alignment is rare, especially after disappointment. Most people need to be redirected when things don't go their way. They drift into resentment. They drift into comparison. They drift into self-blame or pride. But you didn't drift. You stayed centered. You stayed anchored. Even when your emotions were heavy, you didn't let them drive the direction of your faith. That alone speaks of inner authority. You didn't ask God to prove himself. You didn't test him with ultimatums. You didn't say, if you don't move now, I'm done. Instead, you adjusted your expectations without abandoning your belief. That flexibility is a sign of wisdom. Rigid faith breaks under pressure. Mature faith bends without snapping. There were moments when you felt disappointed, yes, but you did not let disappointment turn into distrust. You felt the weight, but you didn't let it crush your hope. You acknowledged your emotions without letting them dominate your decisions. That balance is not common, and heaven recognizes balance. God saw that you learned how to sit with discomfort without rushing to escape it. You didn't numb yourself spiritually. You didn't distract yourself with noise. You didn't abandon your values just to feel better temporarily. You stayed present. You stayed honest. You stayed faithful, even when faith felt quiet. This is why I keep saying your response was rare. You didn't need God to constantly reassure you. You trusted his character more than your circumstances. And when someone trusts God's character, they stop demanding constant explanations. They understand that silence does not mean absence. It often means preparation. Let this settle into your spirit gently. You were not being tested to fail. You were being observed to be trusted. God was not measuring your endurance to exhaust you. He was measuring your stability to elevate you. And now you can rest in this truth. What you handled quietly has already spoken loudly in the spiritual realm. Even Michael was stunned. The spiritual realm reacted. Chosen one, there are things that happen in your life that never make sense on the surface because they are not happening only on the surface. What you experienced was not just emotional. It was not just psychological. It was spiritual. And the spiritual realm reacted to the way you carried yourself. Most people think angels only move when people shout, fast loudly, or declare aggressively. That is not true. Angels respond to alignment, not noise. They respond to authority, not anxiety. And what stunned the spiritual realm was not what you said, but what you refused to do. You did not fight emotionally. You did not defend yourself recklessly. You did not react from ego. You stood still when everything around you suggested movement. And that stillness was not confusion. It was confidence. It was trust. It was knowing that not every battle is meant to be fought with words or reactions. When you remained calm, something shifted behind the scenes. The moment you chose peace over proving a point, the spiritual atmosphere changed. Because chaos feeds conflict, but peace invites order. And order is the language of heaven. Let me explain this gently so your mind can receive it. The spiritual realm is structured. There is order. There is timing. There is authority. When you stay aligned, you give heaven permission to move on your behalf without interference. But when you react emotionally, you interrupt divine processes. You didn't interrupt them. You allowed them to work. That is why the reaction was so strong. You trusted the unseen. You trusted God to defend you without your help. And that level of trust activates protection that cannot be forced. You see, many people think strength looks loud. They think power looks aggressive. But in the spiritual realm, real authority is quiet. Real authority does not rush. It does not panic. It does not over-explain. It simply stands. And that is exactly what you did. When you refused to engage in unnecessary conflict, you shifted responsibility to heaven. When you stopped reacting, you allowed divine order to take over. When you chose silence, You chose strategy without even realizing it. This is why your situation did not collapse the way others expected. This is why certain attacks lost momentum. This is why confusion did not consume you. You were being covered in ways you could not see because you did not interfere. Let me speak to your heart now. You were not passive. You were protected. You were not being weak. You were being defended. There is a difference. The spiritual realm reacts when someone operates beyond their emotional impulses, when someone chooses obedience over ego, when someone allows God to move without trying to control the outcome. That kind of discipline shifts assignments. You didn't realize it, but the moment you stayed calm, you stepped out of the enemy's reach, because the enemy feeds on reaction. When there is no reaction, there is no fuel. And without fuel, attacks die quietly. That is why things felt intense but didn't destroy you. That is why pressure came but didn't break you. You were standing under authority, not under attack. And here is something important you need to understand. The spiritual realm is not impressed by loud declarations without alignment. It is moved by obedience, backed by trust. When you stayed aligned, you gave heaven full access to handle what you could not. There were moments when you wanted to speak up, moments when you wanted to explain yourself, moments when you wanted to correct the narrative, but something inside you said, "Stay still, let God handle this." That inner restraint was not fear. It was wisdom rising. And wisdom always triggers movement in the spiritual realm. This is why protection surrounded you even when you felt exposed. This is why things that should have escalated didn't. This is why certain people lost interest in provoking you. They couldn't get a reaction. And without a reaction, their influence weakened. Let me slow this down for your peace. You were not being tested to see if you would fight. You were being tested to see if you would trust. And trust always activates a higher level of coverage. You stayed grounded. You stayed consistent. You stayed faithful without needing to see immediate results. That steadiness is rare. And rarity always triggers attention in the spiritual realm. You didn't see it, but while you were choosing peace, heaven was rearranging things. While you were staying silent, protection was being enforced. While you were remaining calm, confusion was being removed. This is why I say the reaction was real. The spiritual realm responds when a chosen one matures beyond emotional reactions, because that maturity signals readiness for greater responsibility. You are no longer someone who needs to fight every battle. You are becoming someone who knows when to let God fight for you. And that shift changes everything. Let this truth settle into your spirit gently. You were not overlooked. You were covered. You were not abandoned. You were defended. You were not weak. You were operating in authority without even trying. And that is why what you did mattered far more than you realized. And let me add this, because your spirit needs to hear it clearly. When you chose not to react, you didn't just protect yourself. You preserved your assignment. Some battles are distractions designed to pull you out of position. If you had engaged emotionally, you would have stepped out of alignment. But you didn't. You stayed where God placed you. That choice confused the enemy. Because the enemy prepares for reaction, not restraint. He studies patterns, and your pattern changed. Where there should have been anger, there was calm. Where there should have been panic, there was peace. And when patterns change, strategies fail. This is why certain doors close quietly instead of violently. This is why some connections faded without drama. Heaven was separating you gently because you were ready for separation without resentment. Understand this deeply. Stillness is not inactivity. It is precision. It is knowing when to move and when to wait. And you waited well. That is why the spiritual realm responded the way it did. You demonstrated discernment beyond your season, and discernment always attracts divine reinforcement. The chosen one mindset. Why you think differently. Chosen one, if you have ever felt like your mind works differently from the people around you, let me put your heart at ease. You are not strange. You are not disconnected. You are not overly sensitive. You are simply wired for depth. And depth always feels lonely in a shallow world. You notice things others overlook. You sense shifts before they become visible. You feel emotional undercurrents that others dismiss. This is not imagination. It is discernment. God trained your perception long before He revealed your position, and that training changed the way you think, process, and respond. This is why you don't rush into decisions easily. You weigh things. You observe. You pray silently. While others act impulsively, you pause. Not because you're unsure, but because you understand that timing matters. The chosen one mindset is not fast. It is precise. You don't crave chaos. You crave clarity. You don't thrive in noise. You thrive in understanding. That's why crowded spaces drain you and quiet moments restore you. Your mind was designed to hold weight, not clutter. And because of that, God had to teach you boundaries early. Many times you felt misunderstood, because you didn't explain yourself the way others expected. You didn't react the way they wanted. You didn't conform to emotional norms. And that made some people uncomfortable. But that discomfort was never your responsibility. Your mindset has been shaped by trials, not theories. You didn't learn wisdom from books alone. You learned it from disappointment, from waiting, from silence, from unanswered questions. Experience carved discernment into you, and discernment rewires the way you think. This is why you don't envy easily. You don't compete loudly. You don't feel the need to prove yourself. You've learned that comparison steals peace, and peace has become more valuable to you than applause. Chosen ones think long-term. While others focus on immediate gratification, you consider impact. While others chase attention, you seek alignment. While others react emotionally, you respond intentionally. This mindset wasn't born overnight. It was built through discomfort. Let me address something your heart has carried quietly. You often feel isolated, not because you are alone, but because few people can meet you at your level of awareness. Depth recognizes depth, and until someone grows, they may never fully understand you. This is why God allows seasons of solitude, not to punish you, but to protect you. Solitude sharpens discernment. It heals emotional dependency. It strengthens identity. When you are comfortable alone, you become unshakable around others. Your mind has learned how to separate emotion from decision. You feel deeply, but you don't let feelings lead. You acknowledge pain without letting it control your direction. That balance is rare, and it is the mark of someone who has been refined. There were times you questioned why God made you this way, why you couldn't be carefree like others, why you had to feel things so deeply. But now you are beginning to see it. Your sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a spiritual sensor. Because of this mindset, you cannot tolerate dishonesty for long. You sense when something is off. You feel when alignment is missing. And even if you can't explain it logically, your spirit knows. That inner knowing has protected you more times than you realize. Chosen ones do not chase people. They observe them. They do not beg for understanding. They wait for recognition. And if recognition never comes, they remain at peace anyway. Let me soothe your mind here. You are not difficult to understand. You are just not meant to be understood by everyone. Your mindset was designed for responsibility, not popularity. And responsibility always requires clarity, discipline, and depth. This is why God trusts you with silence. This is why He trusts you with wait. This is why He trusts you with preparation seasons that others would reject. Your thinking is steady because your spirit has been trained. Your responses are measured because your heart has been healed. Your mindset is different because your assignment is different. And the sooner you accept that, the more peace you will carry. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't need to shrink to fit spaces that cannot hold you. You don't need to rush to prove your worth. Your mindset already reveals it, and heaven knows exactly why you think the way you do. And let me speak gently into something you may have struggled to name. Your mind does not shut off easily. You think deeply, sometimes late into the night. You replay conversations. You analyze motives, not because you are anxious, but because your spirit is always seeking understanding. God wired you this way so you would not be easily deceived. Many people move through life unaware. You move through life aware. Awareness can feel heavy, but it is also protective. It keeps you from rushing into places that would drain you. It keeps you from attaching to people who would delay you. And even when awareness feels uncomfortable, it is still a gift. This is why shallow conversations exhaust you. This is why forced connections feel unnatural. Your mind is not designed for surface-level living. You crave meaning, you seek truth, you want substance, and that desire shapes the way you speak, the way you listen, and the way you decide. You don't enjoy pretending. You don't enjoy wearing masks. You don't enjoy emotional games. That's why you prefer honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Peace matters more to you than being liked. Integrity matters more to you than being accepted. And that value system did not come from people. It came from refinement. God allowed your mind to be stretched early so you wouldn't be shaken later. You learned how to sit with uncomfortable truths. You learned how to be alone without being lonely. You learned how to stand firm without becoming rigid. That balance took time and it took healing. Let me reassure you here. There is nothing wrong with you for needing